Okay, well, thank you for joining me. My first question, I want to talk about your paper, Vagal Pathways, Portals to Compassion, and the heart-face connection. So could you just start out by explaining what is the heart-face connection?
Oh, sure. When we are born, actually in utero, the area of the brainstem that regulates the heart through the vagus, actually the pathways moves from the dorsal area to the ventral area, regulating the heart, that is. And it reaches an area of the brainstem that controls the muscles of the face and the head, including the laryngeal and pharyngeal muscles. So as that occurs, the actual function of that is we basically broadcast our physiological state in our voice. If we're safe and calm, our voices have more melody to them. And when we're frightened or angry, it starts having less inflection. When we're really frightened, it goes high. And when we're angry, it can go high or low, but becomes more monotonic. Our faces, when we feel safe, viscerally safe, our faces have animation. And when we're frightened, our upper part of the face, especially the upper part, basically looks blank. So we have a face-heart connection, and at birth, this face-heart connection is actually how babies suckle. So it's the same nerves involved in social communication and calming are involved in ingestion and calming, and we still ingest as a mechanism for calming, except in the mental health area, they call that eating disorders. But really, the body is trying to find a calm state, and it uses ingestion, just like a baby would.
Right. Well, that seems pretty important for people that are working with suffering and people that are working on the front lines, and being able to provide authentic, compassionate care. So I guess my question now for you is, can that be manipulated? Can you kind of try to self-regulate and fake it till you make it? If you're feeling one thing, can you try to make your face do something else so you can make your patients feel cared for when maybe you're having a really bad day yourself?
Okay, this is a good question, and I get emails on this. Like I'm telling people, one of the emails was a pushback saying I'm giving all the predators all the cues of how to make people safe. And the answer to this really is that in general, you really can't fake it. If your body, it's not the words we say, and if we try to smile and we're really in the dumps, the smile doesn't work. We'll smile with the muscles of the lower part of the face, and the upper part of the face just will not show exuberance. And many people know this. They feel it in their gut is the term they use, but they often reject the cues, say, oh, the person is really safe to come close to. But in essence, our body is a very good instrument of authentic neuroception of safety. So I can say maybe you can modify and fake it a little bit. I think more than that is you can be aware that your body's shifting state, do a little self-monitoring, self-witnessing, and honor that state in your body, and then see if you can resolve that before you go back and try to work with your clients. So in a sense, you're understanding that your physiology has shifted. And the question is, do you want to broadcast that physiology of threat and distrust and stress, whatever term you want to use, but it's a nervous system that is not accessible? Do you want to broadcast that to your clients or not? And in general, we don't want to do that. So how do we deal with that? Because we have work to do. And that is some self-care, some co-regulation with colleagues, and a moment of sometimes just breathing and calming our bodies down, where we become more aware of our bodily feelings and more appreciative that if our body is in a state of threat, it's not just us, we're broadcasting it to others.
Right. And especially frontliners, healthcare workers, a lot of the time are high achievers. And so they might think, well, this doesn't apply to me. I can fake it and everything will be fine. What would be some of the consequences of trying to do
Oh,
that?
if anyone said that to me, I would say, tell me about your relationships.
Hmm.
I mean, what the person is telling you is that they may think they can get along fine by not being an authentic, accessible person. But if they start saying, I've had difficulty maintaining strong relationships or close relationships, they're telling you that it's part of how they have attempted to survive. And the part is, I'm saying, think more about, can we co-regulate? Can we calm another person? And can they, in receiving our act of kindness, are they calming us back? So visualize the crying baby who becomes calm and conforms to the chest and the arms of the mother. Or even think about a pet dog that is a little bit anxious, a rescue dog, and suddenly becomes on its back, accessible and wanting to be close. So our nervous systems can downregulate our threat cues. But the issue is we have to give that nervous system cues of safety. And so when you start saying fake it till you make it, you're talking about your own sense of yourself. And I'm saying that's only definable in terms of the response of others to you. And if you believe that you can, quote, fake it, get a little assessment of how you're really doing in the world with other people.
And that sounds exactly like some of the terms we use to define burnout.
Yeah.
So not good,
Yeah,
not what we want to do. And while frontliners tend to be very skilled at co-regulation as far as taking care of their patients, everybody has bad days and everybody has things coming up in their life unexpectedly, or long-term ongoing sources of stress that, they just need to manage. And so healthcare workers, while they may be more resilient than most people, they're still people too.
Oh, yeah. I think that's the important message. We're all people, meaning we all have vulnerabilities. I mean, I've gotten into situations where people will say to me, you should know better. And I'm saying, look, I'm a human being as well. I respond to the same things. Now, those responses may not be consistent with my intentional brain, what I'd like to do, but my visceral, my lower brain, my body that is very human, very mammalian, can detect threat and it responds to it, just like everyone else's. And I am aware of it. And at times, like, I need to, in a sense, override it. And that's really what you're saying. And the overriding can occur when you realize that your body's reacting and now you realize the need of the person around you. I think that's the real question that we're dealing with. Okay, I am really wiped out, but the person around me needs me. And the answer is, can I have enough resources where my act of accessibility and co-regulation with the other person has a reward back to me? Is my body calming down? So as I calm the other person, am I getting sufficient feedback that literally nourishes that system? I think this becomes this critical point. We live in a culture that talks about caregiving. And even when you're talking about frontline providers, first responders, we're still talking about giving. But those who give get a lot in return in terms of the relationship and interaction with those whom they are regulating or calming. And we can't forget that, but we can remember that when we get burnt out, that feedback is coming not at the same rate. It's not as rewarding because the quality of what we are projecting to the other doesn't have the same quality.
And I think that is why a lot of people get into this work. It is a bidirectional relationship. And that's where the intention comes from, to serve. At the beginning, everyone shows up, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to engage in part of that. And then just over time, people get worn out and for these reasons that we've discussed. So what can people do instead? How can people become more resourced, and how can managers help their employees become more resourced?
Well, the first thing is to know when your resource is dissipating. So we have to become better self-monitors. We become better witnesses of ourselves. We have to respect that our body is screaming at us at times. We may have to tell the body that it can't control us at the time because we have things that are important. But we probably should tell our body something like, hang on for a while, and then I'll be in a state where I can relax and treat my body well. Or the way that organizations can function is an understanding that even though you can't leave the premises to, in a sense, deal with your own needs, you can have times and spaces where colleagues can interact. It's almost metaphorically like a teacher's lounge in a
Mhm.
school. I don't even know if they have those anymore, but they were there for the same reasons. They were, in a sense, teachers needed to co-regulate because the classroom setting, in the way that our traditional education models, is not very co-regulatory. It's more pontific. And the issue is, so the teachers aren't getting that much back in certain settings, and they may need certain types of social engagement. And I'm saying that first responders need social engagement and concern from others. And so that has to be worked into the program. It's not necessarily, a smoking break or whatever things, or a coffee break, but it's that moment or moments where people can sit down with each other and share something.
Right. So debriefings, we call it when, especially when people have scenarios that they'd like to talk through when something
Mm,
happened, and they can get support from their colleagues for
yeah,
that. But it
yeah,
sounds like what you're saying too is we could put these into place as ways to um, get resources before people become burnout or traumatized.
mm,
And we should be proactive about creating these safe spaces where people can be together and co-regulate.
yeah. We have to be proactive, and the other thing is we have to acknowledge that not everyone is as vulnerable. Not every first responder is as vulnerable to the stresses or the threats that are going on in the workplace. Some people have more resilience, and many people who go into the world of trauma or dealing with helping people with traumatized have a trauma history themselves, which means that they're going to be triggers. And so we can't say, oh, here's the program, every 2 hours you have to take this. We have to be a little flexible because we want to expand the resources and saying, when you feel this way, this is what you can do. First, you can, in a sense, try to self-regulate through breathing methods and uh, getting into a place where there's less sensation, a quiet space. If that doesn't work, the notion of co-regulation is important. And what you were describing, debriefing, is really about people witnessing each other.
Mhm.
So if we say, well, it's not really debriefing, but I'm able to blow it off. I'm able to express the feelings. I'm able to share that. And someone is listening without telling me, oh, I would have done it this way, without going into a rapid evaluation. But that question of how would you have done it is a co-regulatory reciprocal one. So the issue is the person tells what has happened and requests, and then there's a role reversal. And as long as you get role reversals, you're simulating what play does. Play is role reversal, where we are active and we calm, we're active and we calm. And these are neural exercises of co-regulation.
In yoga philosophy, we have a term for this to facilitate healing. It's satsang, which means company of the wise. So spending time in the company of the wise is healing for yourself.
Mhm.
And as we create these spaces, it's something available, not just for people up on a pedestal. They're
Yeah.
the wise people and we're in their company, but for everyone to be together, because I think everyone has wisdom to share.
Yeah, I wonder if the history of that construct is really about the wise were really people who were able to witness and listen. And I think the less wise are impulsive and try to fix.
Yes. Yes, there and helping.
Mm,
And what does that mean
yeah,
for, are we trying to fix or
gotcha.
are we witnessing and just being with?
Yeah, so the issue is witnessing being with is supporting the individual on their journey. Fixing it is immediately evaluating whether they could do it on their own. They're feeling guilty, they're feeling bad, they're feeling shame. And that's not what our job is. Our job is to witness others, to support them and help them on their journey.
Absolutely. A couple other just more detailed questions about shift work. And so a lot of nurses specifically work on these 3 12-hour shifts, so 7 to 7. And 12 hours is a long time to be focused on any task, much less making life or death decisions. And first responders have these crazy long shifts as well, up to 24 hours. And then we have people working night shifts. Do they need to take into account being especially proactive about creating these kind of resources? Does the nervous system, it has limits, right? So what are their limits? Could we be more effective with systems that had people only working for 8-hour shifts instead, or should there be a limit there?
Well, first of all, we're a biological system, and our biology has a clock in it. So we have circadian rhythms. The circadian rhythms affect our alertness, our sleeping, our digestion. They can be retuned. So I would say that you could do, your 8-hour shifts. It could be night. It could be 8 to 4 or whatever. Yeah, 8 to 4, 4 to 12, and 12 to 8. When I was actually, when I was in graduate school and college, I worked summers in a factory, and I would take any time I could get, and I would work many different swing shifts. It was very disruptive. And so the issue is, and this sensitivity to shift is also a developmental phase. So when you're younger, you're more sensitive to it. As you get older, your nervous system lacks the same types of sensitivity, and it kind of blends. But our nervous system likes a couple things. It likes predictability. It's a metaphor for safety for our nervous system. And it literally gets conditioned by time. So we have a type of classical conditioning, which is linked to the time we get up, time we eat, time we go to bed. And schedules are actually quite useful in terms of the regularity of these biological systems. So at 12, I'm not going to make judgment on 12 hours. As an academic, 12 hours, I'll work 12 hours.
Right. Yeah. And we all have
Yeah.
to do what we have to do.
Yeah,
But as far as, is there a point where pushing your sympathetic nervous system all day for 3 days and then just kind of
crash.
and you collapse, at the end?
Yeah, well, the issue is if you push your sympathetic nervous system, it's metabolically costly. And that's a trigger to your nervous system to collapse. So it's not that we can't go into let's say, a defensive sympathetic state to get all that energy out. It's just that it's very metabolically costly, and our nervous system says you can do this for a while, but what we, as our nervous system, are not going to allow you to do it. And it'll just shut you down. And sometimes that gets manifested as depression. It could get manifested as burnout, despair. All these things come out, and we try to create externalized labels, but our body says to us, can't do it anymore. Enough of this stuff. And it's going to try to keep you out of that place for your own survival. So the body is really reacting to the constraints that we put on it. So, but I don't know. You're asking a very complicated question, and that is the 3 days, 12-hour model for nurses a good one, a functional one? Or does it, see, what they would first start to evaluate is decision-making capabilities. And for I would say short periods of time, meaning days, not years, people can go out without sleep and do pretty well on decision making. But if you overextend that system as well, the system fights back and says, I need to recover my resources. So the issue is, what's the endpoint? Is the endpoint decision making, or is the endpoint other attributes of feeling healthy or happy? And people get confused about endpoints. For some, it's how much money they'll be paid. For others, is whether they enjoy it. So it's a complicated question. And my lens is always, what's your body trying to tell you?
Right. And that sounds like a good place we can end here is self-compassion. It seems to be the theme in all of these answers that you're giving me, which are knowing your limits is self-compassion. Honoring your limits is self-compassion. So we need to bring that into our sense of interpersonal biology, right? And how am I able to serve in this moment, and where do I need to practice more self-care? And then as well as like, just how much can I give?
I think we're basically confronted with a paradox. And the paradox is in the world that you're talking about is people want to give, they want to contribute. But there's also the resource that they have to give, and they're getting feedback from that. And this is where learning or honoring your own body, being aware of it, is critical. And that is what I said earlier. We, as a culture, do a poor job in witnessing our own bodies or honoring our own bodily state. And this requires a degree of focus and respect and understanding. The reason we do such a poor job in that is that we're basically conditioned to do a poor job. Starting from early childhood, we're told not to listen to the body, sit still, not to move around. We're basically conditioned to turn off the feedback loops that evolved to optimize our health. So as we numb our body, we find out we can function better in the world. So what do we mean function better? We can be more productive, make more money, reach different objectives. But what about functioning of our body? It's compromising it. So we end up living a life that disrupts homeostatic processes at the expense of being able to accumulate more or be more successful in anything that we're wanting to do, including doing good for others. So we have to acknowledge that we are a physiological resource, and we have to respect it, and we have to nurture it as well. And so we start even entering or bringing to the table this notion, I have to nourish my body. We start sounding to ourselves as if we're self-centered, especially with other people suffering with things we need to do. But we can't support others unless we are a viable resource. So we're stuck with these very interesting paradoxes that are basically style life issues or philosophy of life issues.
Well, philosophy of life and philosophy of organizations, and the idea of looking at productivity, as you said, as like an end goal, when at the same time we have things such as reimbursement rates that are looked at from patient satisfaction. So if we want to give quality care and authentic compassion to our patients, because they can tell if we're faking it, then we have to give our frontliners resources. That's good business.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. It will change outcomes. So when you give authentic cues of safety, you reduce threat responses in others, and the threat responses are the responses that kill us. They increase inflammation, they disrupt homeostatic function, they create disease state. So it makes sense. And in a medical environment, people are suffering from what we would call stress-related symptoms, but those are merely a physiology that's shifted from a co-regulatory calm state to a state that is under chronic threat. The metaphor I often use is that we live in a matrix, kind of like the movie. But the matrix is really, we're being bombarded with cues of threat, and we're just kind of navigating through this matrix of cues of threat. And no one said, hey, maybe we don't have to. And this is what would happen if we could, in a sense, had safe time or safe spaces. Not that we can get rid of all the cues of threat, that we can have envelopes of time and space where those cues of threat aren't there. And that's what co-regulation attempts to do. It tries to negate the effects of those cues of threat, and then we become a resource for others.
And we know from research that patients have better health outcomes when they feel cared for by their providers, but they can only feel cared for if it's true, authentic compassion.
Yeah, we're not an automobile. We're not going to an automobile where we, go through a line, get a variety of tests, even though the medical system is pretty much treats people like machines, saying there's nothing wrong with you. The blood test shows nothing. And telling people that when they have chronic diseases or chronic disorders, and they can't identify a pathogen, they can't identify an organ dysfunction, that it's not real, go see a psychiatrist. That's still going on. And that's because in medicine, they're not well trained about the role that the nervous system plays in regulating these organs. And so they're very well trained in seeing the damage to the organs, but there is a sequence in which the nervous system regulates the organs. And when the nervous system stops doing its optimal homeostatic job, the organs become more vulnerable for disease. And it's during that period of time of vulnerability that people have all these symptoms and they can't find anything because medicine doesn't have tools to measure the dynamic neuroregulation of the organs.
Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate all this information that you've answered all of my questions. I had one other silly little question. So in that same paper, you talked about chanting, because that's one of the ways that we can regulate our nervous system. And I don't know that not everyone has experience with chanting, but I wonder if singing, diaphragmatic singing, could make you a better frontliner. That's something easy you can do in your car.
Yeah, well, certainly. Remember, what is singing? It's slow exhalation, which enables ventral vagal activity to have more effect, so it calms you. It's also laryngeal and pharyngeal activity for intonation, and that's coming from the same area of the brainstem that regulates the vagus going to your heart. In fact, laryngeal and pharyngeal nerves are vagal nerves. They're just not going to your heart. So that's how we broadcast our physiological state in our voices. So yeah, singing is great. And so if we sang, we're singing till we make it as opposed to faking it. So we are actually creating functionally a vagal nerve stimulator to calm our bodies down.
I love that. Well, that's a great action tool for anyone watching this video is if you want to practice and tone up your vagal nerves, then just put on some music and sing a happy song.
Yeah,